For over 50 years, Chuck Norris kept his mouth shut. He gave short answers. He smiled for the cameras. He deflected the questions. But now, at 85 years old, something has changed. Chuck Norris is finally talking. And what he is saying about Bruce Lee is stopping people dead in their tracks. Not because it is scandalous. Not because it is mean. But because after all these decades of silence, hearing Chuck Norris speak this openly and this honestly about the man who changed his life forever feels like something truly special. Something that was never supposed to happen. So if you have ever wondered what Chuck Norris really thought about Bruce Lee behind closed doors, you are about to find out. Because today, the legend is finally telling the truth. Before we get into what Chuck Norris said, you need to understand just how big of a deal this really is. These are not two ordinary men we are talking about. These are two of the most legendary figures in the entire history of martial arts. Two men whose names are spoken with the same kind of deep respect that people usually save for royalty. And the connection between them goes so much deeper than most people know. It goes deeper than a single movie, deeper than a single fight scene. It goes all the way back to a real friendship, a real training partnership, and a bond that Bruce Lee himself carried with him until the very day he died. That is the story we are telling today. And trust us, you are going to want to stay for every single word of it. Let us take you back to where Chuck Norris's story truly begins. Carlos Ray Norris was born on March 10, 1940, in a small town in Oklahoma. If you had seen young Chuck back then, you would never have believed he would one day become one of the most feared men on the planet. He was quiet. He was shy. He was not athletic at all. He struggled in school. His father was an alcoholic who would disappear for months at a time, leaving the family embarrassed and struggling with no money. Young Chuck learned very early in life how to disappear into himself, how to stay quiet, and how to survive without drawing attention. That deep shyness followed him all the way through childhood and into his teenage years. Then, in 1958, everything changed. Chuck joined the United States Air Force and was sent to a base in South Korea. It was there, thousands of miles from home, in a foreign country, that a shy young man from Oklahoma walked into a martial arts class for the very first time and discovered something that would define the rest of his life. He began training in Tang Soo Do, a Korean martial art, and something inside him woke up. He was not the shy, invisible kid anymore. He had found his thing. He earned his black belt. He came home to America a completely different man. He started teaching karate. He started competing in tournaments. And slowly, steadily, Chuck Norris began building a reputation as one of the most dangerous and skilled martial artists in the entire country. By 1967, he was winning national championships. By 1968, he had become the world professional middleweight karate champion. And here is the part that makes that title even more impressive. He held that title for 6 straight years and retired without ever losing again. 6 years as world champion, undefeated when he walked away. That is not a small thing. That is the kind of record that makes other fighters shake their heads in disbelief. Chuck Norris was the real deal, and the entire martial arts world knew it. But even at the absolute top of his game, with all those championship belts and all that respect, nobody could have predicted what was about to happen next. Nobody could have predicted Bruce Lee. They met in 1968 at a karate tournament in the United States. Bruce Lee had recently become known to American audiences through his role as Kato on the television show The Green Hornet. He was electric. Everyone who met him felt it immediately. There was something about Bruce Lee that was different from anyone else in the room. He moved differently. He thought differently. He talked differently. He had this fire inside him that you could almost see with your own eyes. And when Chuck Norris and Bruce Lee finally stood in the same room together, something clicked between them almost immediately. Two martial artists. Two men who had dedicated their entire lives to the art of fighting. And yet they were completely different from each other in almost every possible way. What happened next was remarkable. For about 2 years, Bruce Lee and Chuck Norris trained together regularly. Not in a gym, not in a studio. Right there in Chuck Norris's own backyard. Think about that for a second. Two of the greatest martial artists who ever lived. working out together in somebody's backyard, pushing each other, testing each other, learning from each other. Chuck Norris has described those sessions as unlike anything he had ever experienced before. Bruce Lee's speed was something he had simply never seen in another human being. It was not just fast. It was on a completely different level. The kind of speed that makes your brain struggle to process what your eyes are seeing. And Bruce Lee was not just fast with his body. He was fast with his mind. Always thinking. Always analyzing. Always looking for a better way to do something. But here is where the story gets even more interesting. During all those training sessions, all those hours in the backyard, with all that sparring and pushing and testing, Chuck Norris has been very careful over the years about what exactly he reveals. He has always said that what happened between them never rose to the level of a real fight. They were training partners. They were friends. And that is what he has held onto for decades. But at 85, the way he talks about Bruce Lee now carries a weight to it that feels different. It feels like a man who has had 50 years to think about someone who mattered deeply to him, and who is only now allowing himself to say out loud just how much. Then came the phone call that would change both of their lives forever. Bruce Lee had returned to Hong Kong after struggling to find the kind of roles in Hollywood that he deserved. Hollywood in those days was not ready for an Asian leading man, no matter how talented he was. So Bruce Lee went back to Hong Kong and became the biggest movie star the continent had ever seen. His films were explosive. They were unlike anything audiences had ever watched before. And then in 1972, Bruce Lee picked up the phone and called his old training partner in America. He had a movie, he had a role, and he wanted Chuck Norris to play his enemy. The film was called Way of the Dragon, and the fight scene they created together at the Colosseum in Rome is still talked about today as one of the greatest martial arts sequences ever put on film. What most people do not know is just how difficult that scene was to make. Bruce Lee did not have permission to film at the Colosseum. So he did what Bruce Lee always did. He found a way. He paid off the right people. He negotiated. He pushed. And he got exactly 1 hour inside those ancient walls to capture the entire fight. 1 hour. No second chances. No room for mistakes. Every single movement had to be perfect on the first try. And somehow, someway, they pulled it off. The movie cost just $145,000 to produce. It went on to earn over $60 million worldwide. Adjusted for today's money, that is more than $700 million. It became the highest-grossing film in Hong Kong history at the time of its release. And it turned Chuck Norris, an American karate champion who had never really acted before, into an international name overnight. Not bad for 1 hour of borrowed time at an ancient Roman ruin. But here's the thing about that fight scene that Chuck Norris has talked about in recent years that gets people every single time. There is a moment in the scene where Bruce Lee throws Chuck Norris to the ground and grabs a fistful of the hair on his chest and pulls it out. Not pretends to pull it out. Actually pulls it out. Real hair. Real pain. And for years, fans wrote letters asking Chuck Norris whether that moment was real. One man wrote that he and his son had watched Way of the Dragon 26 times, and the father wanted to know, did Bruce really pull the hair from your chest? Chuck's answer? Yes, he did. And Chuck Norris wore it like a badge of honor. Because that was Bruce Lee. He did not fake things. He kept it real, even when real meant pulling a handful of chest hair out of your co-star without warning. Now, over the years, people have always wanted to know one thing above everything else. Who would have won if Bruce Lee and Chuck Norris had actually fought for real? Not in a movie, not in training, but for real in their absolute prime, with no rules and no cameras? Chuck Norris has danced around this question for decades. He has always been careful, always respectful, always measured. But at 85, he finally gives you a sense of exactly where he stands. And what he says carries so much more meaning than a simple answer ever could. He has praised Bruce Lee's speed more times than anyone can count. He has said openly that in all his years in martial arts, he never encountered anyone who moved like Bruce Lee. Not close. Not even in the same conversation. The speed was simply on another level. But Chuck Norris was no ordinary opponent either. He was a 6-time world champion. He had beaten some of the best fighters in America. He was bigger, stronger, and had a deep competitive fighting record that Bruce Lee simply did not have. Bruce Lee never competed in formal tournaments the way Norris did. He believed that real fighting happened outside the ring, not inside it. So comparing them has always been like comparing two different languages. Both beautiful, both powerful, but built on completely different foundations. What Chuck Norris says now at 85 is not about who is better. It is about something much more meaningful than that. It is about what Bruce Lee meant to him as a person, as a friend, as someone who saw something in Chuck Norris and gave him an opportunity that launched the second half of his entire career. Without Bruce Lee, there is no Chuck Norris action star. Without that phone call in 1972, without Way of the Dragon, without that 1 hour at the Coliseum, Chuck Norris might have spent the rest of his life running karate schools and competing in tournaments. It was Bruce Lee who opened the door to Hollywood for him. And Chuck Norris, at 85 years old, is not shy about saying that anymore. He has called Bruce Lee one of the most remarkable human beings he ever had the privilege of knowing. He has talked about the way Bruce carried himself, the confidence, the intelligence, the wit, the way he could walk into a room and make every single person in it feel like they were watching something they had never seen before. And he has talked about the loss, about what it felt like when Bruce Lee died on July 20th, 1973, at just 32 years old. A man that full of life, that full of fire, that full of everything gone that suddenly. Chuck Norris has carried that loss quietly for over 50 years. And maybe that is why hearing him talk about Bruce Lee now, at 85, feels so different from all the careful, measured interviews of the past. Because there comes a point in a man's life when he stops worrying about how things will sound and starts worrying about whether he said what truly needed to be said. Chuck Norris is at that point now. The legend is finally talking. And what he is saying about Bruce Lee is exactly what the world has been waiting over half a century to hear. Not that Bruce Lee was the greatest fighter. Not that their movie was a masterpiece. But that Bruce Lee was his friend. His real, genuine, irreplaceable friend. And that he is grateful every single day for every hour they spent together in that backyard. And for that one extraordinary hour they shared together inside the walls of the Coliseum in Rome, making history that neither one of them fully understood at the time. Some friendships leave marks that never fade. And 50 years later, it is clear that Bruce Lee left a mark on Chuck Norris that time has only made deeper. That is the truth Chuck Norris is finally telling. And it is more powerful than anything any of us could have imagined.